monumental miscellanea, and funerary paraphernalia. It's Archaeodeath.
Hi Archaeodeathlings, and this time I want to talk about war memorialisation and the archaeology of 20th century commemorations of the dead in conflict zones and across the British landscape. Now, this has been a common theme on my Archaeodeath WordPress blog, and you can read back over 49 posts on war memorialisation, where I've looked at the National Memorial Arboretum, as well as a host of local war memorials, the relationship between war memorials of different wars, the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, and various subsequent conflicts, right up to the recent Afghan wars and Iraq. And also, I've looked at the spatial settings of war memorials and different kinds of urban and rural settings, from cities, towns and villages, in churches, outside churches, thinking about the spatial dimensions. So the biography and the spatial dimensions of war memorials are the two key areas where an archaeological perspective mixes with geography and history, of course, but it's not purely archaeology, but a perspective looking at the spatial and the material dimensions and the stories of war memorials, which are often multiple phased, needing repair, sometimes are moved and translated through the landscape. In other words, the archaeology of war memorials looks at the written sources we have for them, maybe looks at the names of the individuals upon them, but is really about looking at their spatial and biographical elements. But in addition to that, I also pay attention to the selection of symbolism and to the form, the materials selected, and how those aspects interact with the spatial context. So together, I have, over the last 15 years, been one of the scholars who has developed an archaeology of 20th and 21st century commemoration alongside my research into other periods and places. So just to take you to one of my previous blogs, I talked about how, in this case, the Llangollen and Fantasilio War Memorial in Llangollen Town Centre has been redesigned and reorganised with Heritage Lottery funding, I think it was, and given a new association. This is the old association of the First World War Memorial in a Celtic cross form and a smaller Second World War Memorial. And obviously there's things to say about the redeployment of early medieval stone monuments in the widespread sort of symbolism of war memorials, harking back to the ancient past. That's an archaeological theme, but also in this case the spatial redeployment and rearrangement of them so that they're in a different spatial relationship and a different orientation in relation to the town is a fascinating example about how war memorials are not only multi-phase but can be rearranged. They're not static, they're almost fluid in their relationships with the communities that grow and change around them. And this is part of a sort of biographical and the spatial dimensions of war memorial analysis. As well as evocations of the early medieval past, we have examples such as at Johnstown, where the war memorial is over the line of Offa's Dyke. Now, no one's going to know that really, because the whole line of the road from Rwabon north to Wrexham follows the line at this point of Offa's Dyke, but still, the war memorial is at a pivotal junction, a spatial junction point on a top of a ridge, which is coincidental with the kind of topographical arrangement that Offa's Dyke was providing in the late 8th century when built by the Mercian kings to face off and dominate the landscapes of their western frontiers against multiple Welsh rival polities. So we see here a coincidental relationship, but still the relationship between the early medieval past and the modern war memorial does tell us something about the connections planned or shall we say, non-discursive, sort of subliminal almost, between the early medieval past and modern manifestations of medievalism, because of course on top of the war memorial is St George slaying the dragon, defeating evil as a symbol of British, in this case Welsh, triumph and contribution to the war effort and triumph in the First World War. So, and of course augmented again with the Second World War element to it. So war memorials are incredibly varied, but there are some themes there. The reuse of the early medieval past and ancient pasts, early Christian associations in many cases, not exclusively, but many cases, the spatial relationship with junctions, routeways in town, villages and cities as well, and also their materiality, speaking to their interactions with space and how they're augmented over time. Now, one of the war memorials I've most frequently addressed, or twice I've addressed it on my blog, is my local war memorial in Gwerseth in Wrexham Borough, otherwise known locally as Gwerselt. And here we have a war memorial that's in the Imperial War Museum National Inventory as 17873, in its own memorial gardens. And I discuss its unveiling in 1923 by Major General Sir Thomas O'Marden, and dedicated by the Archdeacon of Wrexham in a formal ceremony. It's now a Grade 2 listed building, and I talk about the sort of figure of victory with a down-placed sword, that medievalism there again, and a wreath, and the memorial text, and I'll show you it in a video in a little while. But I also talk about, I record all the information available formally within the National Inventory, but also make clear that it makes some mistakes in the numbers. Also interesting because it doesn't fully address the details recorded in the formal recording, and local history society records online make connections to the identities of those commemorated in both world wars, but doesn't really deal or describe adequately the dynamics and the role of the text, the symbolism, and the monument as a whole. There's not an archaeological perspective. There's a recording database approach which doesn't give you a sense of the experience or engagement with the names and the different orientations and arrangements. And I talk about the dynamic of the private and the public in terms of how this memorial relates and how it has changed over time. And of course, there's a gender aspect because there's also the name of one female on the war memorial, Amy Curtis. So it's an interesting example where a female name has been added to a war memorial. Now, the biographies of the war memorial are not simply its 1914, 18 and then 1939, 45 names, but also its recent centenary augmentation with plastic silhouettes and silhouette figures for the First and Second World Wars on benches that have been put at the back of the war memorial. And this has been a widespread phenomenon I've seen across the land over the last 5, 6, 7 years, to do with the anniversary of the First World War, of using the silhouette as a mode of commemorative medium to place back the human dead in a symbolic form, almost like ghost-like forms, evoking the space. So I talk about that in a second blog post, as well as the torch on the back, which I didn't mention in the earlier one, and some further features of the spatial context. So this is, I talk about how, so even in 5 years difference of blogging, the memorial has subtly evolved. Let's go and look at it in the landscape. Located on the corner of Old Mould Road and Wheatsheaf Lane, we have the War Memorial, and it's in a corner position with big hedges behind, a wall in front with iron railings, 2 benches, and then it's a tall pillar. So you've got the main road and then the Wheatsheaf Lane coming up and Victorian cottages right by it. So this was the old principal road between Mould and Wrexham. So the principal elements of it you see are the 2 benches. These are new benches in this silhouette style, and then the main pillar and monument itself. Now the key features of the monument you can see are a female figure holding a sword placed down with a wreath, sort of commemorating victory or symbolising the goddess of victory, and then the text itself: "To the glory of God and to the honoured memory of the men of this parish who made the supreme sacrifice during the Great War of 1914-18, and then the quote: "Sons of this place, let this be of you be said," this of you said, "that you who live are worthy of your dead. These gave their lives that you may live, may reap the richer harvest ere you fall asleep." And then it's been appended at the bottom with the 1939-1945 dead. There's an extra name of G.A. Hughes, and then a little plant holder. And then there's the ephemeral dimensions are the crosses at the bottom, a slate, and as you can see there are lights. Now if we go around here, you'll see that in addition to that you have, please respect this memorial garden, You have the names on the side from the First World War, so the names for the First World War dead are on the side, on the south facing side. On the back, you can see that it's very much against the sun, if you can make that out. And on the north side, many of these family names can be seen in the local cemetery. It keeps auto adjusting, sorry. There you are. Hopefully you can see it from there. Now these new, now also you see the wreaths placed around the base. You've got the lighting features, so it's lit up at night. There's 4 lights. And the 2 benches. Now the 2 benches are recent memorial additions to do with the centenary of the Great War. This First World War commemorative bench was provided by Gwersyth County Council, Community Council. And then in Welsh you've got the poppies and then the silhouettes of 4 soldiers. It's part of a sort of new commemorative medium with 2 poppies either side, 2 metal poppies. It's part of this poppy culture of memorialisation. And you've also got the 1939 equivalent with Europe, planes, soldiers, sort of showing that sort of action scene, a more upbeat patriotic version, and again with the similar bilingual plaques. So it's quite an expansive space for allowing ceremonies to take place on Remembrance Day, and got a prominent location, but of course its location has faded in significance, although it's next to a settlement, because the old Mould Road is no longer the principal route in and out of Wrexham. That the new Mould Road replaced it, cutting over former railway sidings and therefore bypassing this memorial. But it is still a very distinctive and prominent corner location between a side road and the old main road.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Howard Williams on YouTube. In addition, consider following the ArchaeoDeath WordPress blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.